Appeals.
Jay?
Jay Bradshaw, member of the Board of Appeals.
Dick? David, excuse me, I'm sorry.
David Monar, member of the Board of Appeals.
And Norma?
I'm Norma Blazer, member of the Board of Appeals.
Okay, and I'd like to welcome Liz Fontaine, who is an alternate member of the Board of Appeals. And,
Hey.
okay, and Mr. Sutton?
Hold on, Jack, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
There we go. Jack Sutton, appellant.
Okay. And Mr. Sutton, Richard Sutton?
You're muted, Richard.
Another Sutton, Jack Sutton's son, Richard Sutton.
Okay, and Mr. Cunningham?
John Cunningham. I'm representing the Joneses.
Okay, and Mr. Nagel?
Yes, hi, I'm Chris Nagel. I represent the Stiffs, and we filed this appeal.
Okay. So we will call this meeting of the Board of Appeals to order. And so new business. Number 1A, the consideration of an application for appeal dated September 3rd, 2020, filed by Jeffrey and Carolyn Stiff, represented by Chris Nagel, Esquire, and related to Belgrade Building Permit number 78-19, issued on August 6, 2020, to Jody C. and Stephen C. Jones, the project at 326 Sandy Cove Road. Any discussion, please?
Mike, this is Jay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I wondered if perhaps I forget his name, James K. could speak to the draft document which combines both of these. So we've got two cases that, although different in their specifics in terms of the nature of the appeal, both refer to the same piece of property. And it seems appropriate to me that if we could combine those for purposes of this discussion and our action, it might be an efficient way to proceed.
I agree.
Jane, if I could respond. Oh, that's all right.
Go ahead and do that, James, if you're willing to do that.
Sure, thank you. These are from the same permit, and so it would make sense to combine them. In both instances, you have a fairly bare bones planning board decision and not a planning board decision on the criteria in the shoreline zoning ordinance that you need to review. So my recommendation, and I think counsel for the appellants and for the property owner would agree, my advice would be to remand this back to the planning board for them to make findings of fact, and then you can hear the appeals with the full record before you. So that's why I put together the draft order that I did, which accepts that you have jurisdiction over the matter, that both appeals were timely filed, if indeed that's the case. I wasn't there at the town clerk's desk to see if they came in on time, but it appears to be. And then that they have standing, that the parties who are appealing have standing, Mr. Sutton and Mr. Nagel's clients. And so if you accept that, the idea would be to remand this back to the planning board. You retain jurisdiction in the sense of they don't have to file new appeals again after the planning board makes a decision. You would simply schedule it for the hearing that would be conducted, the appellate hearing. So that's what I've done here.
Okay, thank you very much for that. As all the members of the board,
Questions?
Dick, do you have a question?
Well, one of the things that strikes me is that the appeals are relatively non-specific because the planning board decision is incomplete. It seems to me that before we can determine whether these applications are complete, we need to see revised applications based on the final submissions of the planning board.
Yes, Dave?
I would,
David?
I would certainly agree with Dick, and I think it would be in order to make a motion to remand it back to the planning board at this point in time. Council, if you think that's agreeable, I'm certainly willing to make that motion.
What we'd basically ask for would be, once the planning board makes a decision, we would ask each party who's filed an appeal to state the grounds for their appeal in writing prior to a Board of Appeals hearing. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's my intention.
Yes.
And
Yes.
based on council's advice, I would think that that would be the proper thing to do.
I think that's something that we could do, so that it doesn't require you to go file a brand new appeal, but it does require a statement of the grounds for your appeal from the planning board order, whatever those may be, after the planning board acts on remand. Is that if that's what the board's doing, I can add that sentence to this decision or this order and get you a clean order to sign.
I think at that point, they'd be able to cite the specific sections of the ordinance which are in question, so that we have a specific context for review.
So what we'll do is tack on at the end where it says the appellants will not be required to file new administrative appeals from the planning board's issuance of findings of fact, but will be required to state the grounds for the appeal prior to public hearing. Does that work?
I think that takes care of what we need to do, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Nagel?
Hi, thank you for your time. And we fully support what the board is in the process of doing. Save everyone a lot of time and money, and I believe the Jones do too. I was just going to suggest that to make it more clear for John and I and the Jones perhaps, and anyone else like Mr. Sutton, if you could say that we'll get written comments on the details of our appeal to the board at least 3 days before your hearing, or whatever days number you think is appropriate, as opposed to having them filed on the last day where things can be confusing.
How about 1 week prior, and that way it can go in the board package and all board members can see it?
That's certainly fine with me.
Okay. What I will do is, if the board wants to do that, add that to the motion, to the order that's in front of you. You can just adopt that language by motion, and then I'll send you a clean copy that you can sign. I just can't type while I'm watching this meeting.
Could you repeat the language, though? I didn't hear it.
Certainly. At the end of the last paragraph on page 2, it says there's about halfway through the second line, it starts, the appellants will not be required to file new administrative appeals from the planning board's issuance of findings of fact, comma, the new language, but will be required to state the grounds for the appeal in writing 1 week prior to the public hearing.
Sorry, what was the thing about the timeliness of it?
That they would do that, they would submit this 1 week prior to the public hearing.
Thank you.
Yes, Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, would that be 7 calendar days or 7 business days?
We will make it 7 calendar days if that works.
Okay. Jay, anything?
No, so do you need a second? Do I understand that Dave made that motion?
I don't know as we've actually made a motion.
Oh, okay.
Dave, were you going to make a motion?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to accept council's recommendation with the addendums of adding 7 days, 7 calendar days of submission and adopt council's recommendations for language.
So I apologize. I guess I'm a little confused about how the timing of this is going to go. Because if it's, normally we would have a complete packet, we would review that, and then we would go through the process to set up the hearing, because this is a shoreline zoning issue, we're required to notify DEP and public notice and all those other things. So it seems like we need to have that we need to have the complete information in hand before we can set a hearing date. So I'm a little confused about cart and horse here.
All right. If that's your process, then make sure it works.
Yeah, the normal process would be that we have the packet, we can do the notification, we do the legal ad and all those other things, and we set the date. Now, we're not pre-locked into any particular date. So we certainly want to act on this in a timely manner, but rather than saying, setting a date now and waiting up to, perhaps a week ahead of time, I would suggest that we get the information in hand and then set the hearing date.
Okay, and the planning board is also going to have to prepare a record of its proceeding to give to you as well. So that's
right. Now there's some work to be done between now and then, for sure.
How about if we set the deadline for some time after the planning board issues its written findings of fact, and say that you'll submit this written, you'll state the grounds for your appeal within 30 days after the planning board issues its written findings of fact, and that way you can, Chris, excuse me.
Jim, I think that's perfectly fair, and I think Mr. Bradshaw made a good point. I'm glad he saw ahead. I think it's important that we get the record and the decision and have 30 days to look at it to give you comments. I think we know what's in the record, but so I think the charge to the planning board should be to produce a written decision consistent with Maine law and to produce a record of its proceedings, which I think would include the submissions by the various parties and neighbors and in the minutes of the meetings.
That timeline, as one member, is fine with me. I want to make sure that that's okay with the Suttons also, so that we can make sure that these two pieces remain aligned when we take up this issue. Jack and Richard, would that work for you?
If I may, my two issues are pretty straightforward. I don't have an attorney. I'm an amateur at this business. I'm representing myself, and by proxy our children, really. But I would ask if there's anything more than what I've put in the application to the appeal board that's expected of me before you take the next step.
I think what you've done so far, Jack, it looks pretty complete to myself. And I think everyone has reviewed it, I hope. And does anybody have any questions about that? No? Okay.
Jack, if I can just offer a thought, this written decision that we haven't seen yet may say something about the issue that you're appealing on. And I think what the board is saying is you have an opportunity, although not necessarily an obligation, to make a comment after you see the written decision, if you want to.
I appreciate that, and I thank you for it.
So I believe that's what we're all talking about. You get that, Jim?
Yeah, I do. So instead of being required, we'll have the opportunity.
Yes.
Is that to file a written statement? Of grounds for the appeal. And the problem I'm having is I can count days from when the planning board makes a decision. I don't know when the record's going to be ready. The record clearly would need to be ready before you hold a public hearing in an ample time to allow, John Cunningham, Chris Nagel, everybody to take a look at it and be prepared for that public hearing. So you may or may not have the record ready, but if we set a date of, say, 30 days after the planning board decision, just to supplement your grounds for your appeal. It's not going to limit you. If something comes up when you look at the record and it comes out later, you might want to say something more. You might reserve your right to raise other issues depending on what's in the record, but at least just gets the process going.
Jim, that's fine with me. Let's keep it simple.
Okay.
Norma?
Yeah. Could we please review this timeline, just event by event?
Certainly. What would happen after this, if you adopt this order, the planning board is going to receive it, and the planning board is going to set up a time, a public meeting, when it can prepare findings of fact on this matter. So it will explain its decision. That might happen in one meeting, it may happen in two. I don't know. But once they make their decision, then under this order, as we've just discussed, within 30 days, Mr. Sutton and Attorney Nagel may supplement what they've filed. They'll have the opportunity to file a written statement of what their grounds are for appeal within 30 days after that planning board decision issuing that findings of fact.
And Jim, I assume that would be 30 days from when we get it, because
Yeah.
there's been time lags in the past.
Right, I understand. Let's say within 30 days after receipt of the planning board decision, let's make sure that gets sent certified mail. So that way there's no question about receipt and we will all be okay. But after receipt of the planning board receipt of the planning board findings. So what you typically would do, as Mr. Bradshaw was saying, you would have a meeting where you get these appeal statements and you would see how complete everything is, see if you've got the record, and then set a public hearing. So you'll have that meeting to say, here's what Mr. Nagel submitted, here's what Mr. Sutton submitted, these are the issues on appeal. Let's set the public hearing. Let's make sure we have that record available to all of us sufficiently in advance of whatever public hearing date we set, so everyone will know the information in front of them. And you'd hold that public hearing. I think that's the calendar that I would suggest, Mr. Hano. I think Mr. Nagel has his arm up.
Yes, Mr. Nagel.
Yeah, I know John's been sitting here nicely not saying anything. The Joneses have prepared written comments to the planning board at every opportunity. And I suspect they would want to file written comments to the zoning board. I'll let John speak to that. I only say that because in your discussion, you talked about the opportunity for Mr. Sutton and the Stiffs to file written comments, but you didn't really describe any opportunity for the Joneses to file written comments. And I just want to be clear, and I don't want to turn this into a briefing schedule. I just want to make sure the Joneses have the same opportunity to file written comments that everyone else does.
And I was assuming that you would add us in and accept our comments.
I think we're talking about two different things here. I think what the board was saying is I can't tell from these appeals that have been filed what the grounds are for the appeal. Not, I want a brief explaining your position. Am I right, Mr. Bonar and Mr. Bourne?
think that's how I envision
Okay.
it, Rich.
So when you set the time for a public hearing, you want to know when the record's going to get there, and you may give the parties a deadline to file a brief on the issues. And that would be the Joneses' comments, the abutters' comments. But what we're talking about here is just within 30 days of the planning board, tell me what the basis is for your appeal, because I can't really tell from what was filed here, because you can't know because we don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does make sense.
Okay, so the 30 days is just roughly, the grounds for your appeal. We don't like section 5 of their decision. We contest this, we contest that, period. Just tell me why. Those are the grounds for appeal. At that point, the Board of Appeals will receive that. We'll have a preliminary meeting and decide what are we going to do with this? Where's the record? Is it ready yet? When's it going to be ready so we can set the public hearing? Let's have enough time, and we'll invite the parties to put together their arguments in writing for the public hearing, and they can present them at the public hearing with oral argument. Board members can ask questions, and then the board will make a decision.
We have to remember that we are obligated by law to set the hearing date within a certain amount of time of our official receipt. So can we agree which one of these events is going to be our official receipt?
Well,
When we get the package?
all right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think providing we have agreement from all the parties, the timeline can be modified to fit the circumstances.
That's
Normally
correct.
normally you hold that public hearing within 35 days after receipt of the variance application, and within, actually there isn't a date on it, 35 days after the receipt on the administrative appeal, but you can set, by agreement of the parties, whatever date makes sense.
Well, I would suggest we'll meet whenever the board wants to, and we don't care about any arbitrary time limit. I think the most common sense thing to do would be to treat this first zoning board meeting you've described, at which you will have the planning board's written decision in more complete terms, as well as the neighbors' specific appeal issues, would be the first meeting at which the zoning board considers the merits of the appeal. And any clock that might start ticking would not begin until that date, and we could figure out if we need to extend it.
That works for me. I just wanted to get a date.
Jay?
We have a standing meeting the fourth Wednesday of every month. And when that date comes around, if by the fourth Wednesday of October, we have that information, we can review it, we can set the hearing date. If the timeline doesn't work out so that it's not ready in October, the fourth Wednesday of November is, so I would say, this will get plugged into our regular meeting schedule to review the packet. And once we get it, then we can set the hearing date separately. And I also think, as part of the notification process, as Mr. Nagel or somebody mentioned, all the parties are noticed, the Joneses, all the abutting neighbors, and they have the opportunity to participate in the hearing. And at that point, we would know the hearing date.
Right. So we have a motion on the floor. Jim, could you please review the updated changes in the last draft?
Why don't we do this? Why don't we withdraw that motion, withdraw the second, and withdraw the motion, make a new motion, and I'll read the language that I think we've all agreed to at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
That's correct.
Okay. So the proposed language to add to the end of the last paragraph I'll read the last clause together. What's in there now is this: the appellants will not be required to file new administrative appeals from the planning board's issuance of findings of fact. New language would be, but will have the opportunity to file a written statement of grounds for the appeal within 30 days after receipt of the planning board's findings of fact. So that would be the additional language. Is there a motion to adopt that?
Dave,
Sure, I'll make the motion if nobody else does.
I'll second.
second,
Okay.
Quick comment, Jim. Can you add conclusions of law? Just so it's clear. That's what they need to do.
Can we have someone adopting that change in a second? Friendly amendment, it's fine.
Yes.
Okay,
Good.
all right. Mr. Chair.
so we have, yes. Does someone have a question? Okay, so we have a motion, and did we have a second?
Yes, it was, I moved and Dick seconded.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of this motion to adopt the written statements from Jim and the changes? All in favor?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
during Zoom meetings, a roll call vote is in order.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Warner,
Yes.
Mrs. Blazer, you're muted.
Right, you're
I
muted.
know, I just realized. Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw
Yes.
and Mr. Hano, yes.
So I do have a related procedural question. So what happens to the approval while we're going through this process? Does this stay any activity by the Joneses until this is resolved?
Well, as a matter of law on these, the Joneses could act on a permit, but it would be at their own risk. I don't mean to be speaking for Mr. Cunningham, but that's the way I read it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will revise this order and I will send it by email to Mr. Wilson, or who should I send that to?
Yeah, Jim, if you will send that to me, and then I will distribute it to our appeals board members for their e-signatures via DocuSign. So when you folks see an email from DocuSign, if you'll just open that email and adding your signature is as simple as clicking a button.
Great. Anthony, I'll get that to you in a few minutes after the meeting. Thanks.
Does anyone have anything else? So I have a question, I guess, Jim. Since we've adopted the new language, do we need another motion to adopt your written agreement?
Well, I thought we'd adopted the order with that change, but to make it perfectly clear, we can do a roll call vote and make sure that we've adopted the order with that change. But whatever.
Jay?
I understood that the motion was making the amendment to the document, and so in so doing, we've approved the document as amended, but
Okay.
happy to do whatever you'd like, Mike.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So we have tied both agenda items A and B together, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we have the other agenda item is number C is update board membership. So we have.
Mr. Chair, before you get to that, let me just mention one thing just about how I anticipate the process will go with the planning board, just so everyone has an expectation what the timeline may be. The town's attorney believes that creating the findings of fact will take 2 meetings, And so I'm going to be speaking with the planning board chair this week to try to schedule that into the planning board's agendas. They next meet on October the 1st and then October the 15th. The town's attorney anticipates that each of those discussions may take a couple of hours. You folks all know how methodically our planning board works. And so it's possible that it could take more than 2 meetings. But as of this moment, that's our anticipation, is that hopefully we'll have the findings of fact approved October the 15th. But of course, that could take longer.
Okay, thank you. So our next agenda item would be update board membership. So we have currently 5 full members, correct, Norma? And then with Liz Fontaine is our alternate. We need 1 more alternate, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So thank you again, Dave and Liz, for agreeing to serve. And the last order of business is to approve the minutes of the August 26th meeting. I'm assuming,
So moved.
Second.
okay.
Jay, right?
All in favor? Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Dave Bonner,
Yes.
Norma,
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Yes, sir.
and Mr. Hano, yes. Okay, does anyone else have anything to add?
Real quick one.
Yes.
Have you been sworn in yet, Liz?
Welcome.
Yes, welcome.
As I was gently reminded by Norma, welcome to trial by fire.
Yeah. Okay, if no one else has anything else, we can adjourn the meeting of the Board of Appeals.
So moved.
I'll move.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Bonner,
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw,
Okay.
Norma,
Yes.
and Mr. Hano, yes. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have
for
a
your
good
time.
evening.